All right, Dr. Kerber, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So for those of you at home, welcome to the National Speleological Society's and IYCK's webinar series. Um, the presentation is called Moondiver and is with, and we are very, very lucky to have Dr. Laura Kerber to join us. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Laura.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Dr. Kerber, do you mind sharing what got you involved in caves and deciding to explore caves?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I'm a research scientist. I got my PhD at Brown University, and I got my undergrad at Pomona College, which is in Los Angeles as well. And so I studied geology, and I studied engineering, and I guess in college, I had a minor in math. And so I kind of put all those all together at JPL. For my PhD at Brown, I got really into studying volcanoes on Mars and Mercury, explosive volcanism mostly. And then as I've been at JPL, I've gotten more into effusive volcanism, and actually I study a lot of things about Earth deserts and stuff like that, but I went more from the explosive side of volcanism onto the effusive side. And I actually got into caves kind of recently, I would say. I was always interested in, exploring caves and investigating caves, but really it was when I got interested in effusive volcanism that I started really getting into caves, and that's literally, visiting lava tubes and this kind of thing. And then realizing that a lot of cave entrances and pit entrances are excellent ways of exposing a lot of stratigraphy of volcanic deposits. And so that's what really got me into it. And then I went to a cave workshop. There's the International Planetary Cave Workshop that Tim Titus is involved with. I don't know if you guys know him. And so I went to that meeting that was in Flagstaff that year and got to meet a lot of other people that were interested in caves. That's where I met Aaron Curtis as well. So yeah, so since then I've visited Carlsbad Caverns, which I'd never been to, and I've crawled into a bunch of caves, been to a bunch of workshops. And so it's been really cool to sort of expand my horizons downward into the subsurface.
So for those of you watching, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat at the end of the presentation. We will go, I will go and read the questions, or I might ask someone to expand on it later. So thank you, Dr. Kerber, for joining us. And if it is all right with you, we would love it if you could begin.
All right, thanks. So like I said, I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I do mission formulation, and then I do sort of basic research on Mercury, Mars, and the Moon. I'm the deputy project scientist of a Mars orbiter called Odyssey, which just turned 20 years old earlier this year. So we're very proud of how long-lived that mission is. So today I'm going to talk to you about a mission in formulation. This is an idea that I had probably starting in 2015, and then I'm going to say a little bit about why, what is the reasoning behind this mission, and a little bit about the journey that it's taken from when we first thought of it to sort of where it is today. So in the background, I wanted to share this a little bit because this is a really exciting thing that's happening. And today there was actually an announcement that NASA made that directly feeds into this kind of swoosh that you see. So NASA is going to the moon, and it's very, very exciting. And there's been several times in the past where NASA, sort of said, yeah, maybe we want to go to the moon, but nobody was quite sure how serious they were about it. And as soon as the political climate change, everything moon got canceled. This time it feels a lot more real. They're actually building hardware. They actually have some firm dates for when they're launching it, and things are happening in all sorts of realms across lunar exploration, which is super exciting. Of course, there's the whole human arc of the Artemis missions, sending spacecraft around the moon, and they're building the space launch system, and it's all very exciting. And then the part that's closer to me is on the robotic side. They have this thing called the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLIPS, and they're getting private companies to build landers and land them on the moon. And all NASA really does is they provide some seed money to for them to research how to make the landers. We provide some know-how to land the landers, and then we have some payload space that we buy on the lander. So today they announced several payloads that are going to be going to different places on the moon, on the near side of the moon, and then up on the far side towards the South Pole. And one of my friends, his mission was chosen. He was gonna send a seismometer down to the Schrodinger basin on the far side of the moon. So it's really cool, and the pace is just completely different than what we have become used to. It's very exhilarating. They're sending 2 of these sorts of commercial lunar payload services per year. And so even though this one just got chosen, they also just released the announcement to send another payload to the moon next year. That they're going to choose for next year, and then it's going to go. And by the end of this year, they're supposed to land to the 2 first robotic missions on the moon. So that's very exciting. So in this, that's sort of the background of what I'm talking about. This particular mission that I'm talking about, it's a bit larger than the missions that I was just saying were selected, but it's kind of in this arc of like, oh, everyone's going to the moon. You know, what would you send to the moon if you had a chance? I'm going to tell you about what I would send to the moon. So this, I think you guys would all find quite interesting. It's an enormous hole in the moon. And this was discovered first by SELENE Kaguya Orbiter. It's a Japanese spacecraft in about 2009. And then this particular picture was taken by the American spacecraft, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It has a resolution of about 50 centimeters per pixel. So it's a really high resolution camera. And they took a picture of this hole in the moon at various lighting angles. And you can see that we can kind of look at it from an angle, and we can see that it goes back down into the moon at least 20 meters. And it could go back kilometers and kilometers, but we don't know yet. That's as far as we can see just by looking from orbit. So when this was first found, there was a lot of press that came out about it. First, wow, there's a hole in the moon. I mean, seriously, there's a hole in the moon. And then, you know, oh, there's a hole in the moon. There's probably hidden tunnels down below. There were TED Talks about it. There was a country song about it. How about them holes in the moon? And then people started thinking about, if there is a hole in the moon with potentially a subsurface space, what would we put in that hole? And people were thinking, wow, like according to theoretical calculations of how large a lunar lava tube could be, you could potentially fit a city inside some of these lava tubes. And you could put astronauts down there. You can make a base down there. It's very nice, a lava tube, because it's got this big overburden on the top. So, you know, in this particular case, it's probably 60 meters of overburden. So more than enough that you need to protect yourself from radiation coming from space. Inside the tube, it's a balmy, I think it's plus 15 C all year round. And it's protected from all of those things, the temperature extremes, micrometeorites, radiation. So people are, oh, this would be a great place for a moon base. And then of course, people started thinking about, oh, forget about what we might put down there. What if there's something already down there? So there are all sorts of theories that came out, maybe a personal desktop monolith. There's one of my favorite conspiracy theories is the hollow moon theory, that the moon is hollow and it's actually a spacecraft, and at some point somebody will come and fly it away. So here's a breakdown of what the hollow moon looks like. So they said, there's a hole in the moon, an entrance to the solid moon. And I always like to say, don't worry, we're NASA. We checked to see if the moon is hollow, and it is not, unfortunately, hollow. So this is the size of this hole. It's actually pretty big. Here's it compared to a football field. And then I overlaid it on top of the JPL campus, and it swallows the entire cafeteria, as well as our mall and fountain and coffee truck. Everyone always says, you should put the hole somewhere else, like over the parking lot. Don't let it fall to the cafeteria. If you look at the hole from the side, I tried to find buildings that you could put inside this hole to show how deep it is. It's a lot taller. It's actually a lot deeper than a lot of buildings. You could fit the entire Saturn V rocket in here. You could fit the SLS Block 2 rocket in here. You could fit many skyscrapers, Big Ben. You could kind of launch the SLS out of this hole like a missile silo. And then I like to say it's about, I think, 20 giraffes tall. The top giraffe would just be peeking out of the top of the hole. So it's deep. And here's an image of the Devil's Throat in Hawaii, if you're familiar with that crater. This is my friend Anazina standing on the other side, and she's a little tiny. This pit is about half as deep as the one that I'm showing you on the moon. So there I was, this cool pit going down into the center of the moon. Somebody's going to have to explore this place. It is such that this pit, once having been made in the moon, almost nothing affects it in any way. Whatever you put down in that pit will probably last for billions of years. If the dinosaurs had a space program and left some artifacts for us to find somewhere, this would be the place where they'd still be preserved after all this time. So how do we get down there? This was in 2015. I met Isa Nesnes, who became my partner in crime. He had a rover called the Axel rover, which is an extreme terrain rover that rappels down into things. And so we had lunch and I said, okay, well, I know exactly where I would like to send your extreme terrain rover. And he already had a actual built version of it that you could take out in the field. And it's pretty cool because how it works is, here's the example of the prototype rappelling down that's a quarry actually. And then it has inside these wheel wells, it's like a lazy Susan full of instruments. So if you look at one spot on the surface, you can spin it around and look at the exact same spot on the surface with a different instrument, which is really useful. And the payload bays are pretty large. And then it has 2 cameras inside of this inner part. And it's got a winch here, which kind of lets the rope out. And so you don't have to, there doesn't have to be a winch at the top kind of letting the rope out and having slide along the surface. The robot itself lets its own cord out, kind of like a vacuum cleaner. So I went to grad school. There was a ton of people who studied the moon at my grad school. I decided, who's going to join me on this crazy journey? I don't have any money for them. I just have an idea. Let's try and put together a mission. So I went looking for all the people that I knew from grad school, and some of them were still in the field and some of them weren't. They were data scientists. They were working for the government. I felt like, they're lounge singers or something. I'm going, hey, let's get in the band back together for one more job. So how do you make a mission reality at NASA? First, you have an idea. And then you find some like-minded individuals, most of whom you're going to ask to work for you very hard for free for a long time. Then you kind of have to see if it's feasible. Is it actually going to work? Is the engineering sound? You have to kind of get your institution to support you. So in our case, it was just going to JPL management, begging them to take us seriously. And then you find some funding. You develop the technologies with the funding, you submit it to NASA, as a big proposal. It's like 400 pages long. And then usually you just keep trying, find more funding, develop the technologies a little bit more, submit to NASA again. So here's our team. This is the crazy team we put together. Most of them, a bunch of the scientists and a bunch of engineers at JPL standing in front of the rover gets you an idea of what the size of that rover. And I'd like to point out, this is Brett Denevi, and she was my deputy PI of the mission. And then you can see Isa Nesnes is right here as the rover chief engineer. So all we had to do was land on the moon, then rappel down all of these layers that you saw, maybe take a great picture of the Earth from the bottom of the pit. We actually calculated that from this particular pit, you can see the Earth from the bottom of the pit, which would be amazing. And then explore the mysterious shadowy domain below the moon, which we don't know anything about, except for that it goes back 20 meters. So you might be wondering, what is it that I find so compelling about going to this place, besides just the fact that it would be super cool and we'd like to go explore subterranean caverns on other planets. Well, the thing that really hit me, and I was talking about it before, is the stratigraphy that I could see. In the wall of this pit were beautiful layers of lava that are really not seen anywhere else on the moon. And so to put this in context, I like to say that the study of geology is like you're reading a lab manual that somebody made, but they tore out half the pages. And on the case of the Earth, it's worse than that. They tear out almost all of the pages of the beginnings of Earth history. Then you shred it into a million pieces, then you subduct it and melt it, and then you weave it into sedimentary rocks and waterlog it at the bottom of the sea, and then you fold it into a bunch of folds and mountains. And then from that, you're trying to figure out what happened in the earliest parts of Earth history. The moon is much more convenient because the moon was in its original crust, had a magma ocean at the beginning of time, and then it started to have some basalt happening, this dark parts of the moon, and then it stopped. And it's preserved like a time capsule forever. The only thing that's a trouble of the moon is that then it was bombarded by tiny meteorites. And so essentially the whole history of the moon that we could normally read on the surface is shredded. So the whole surface of the moon is covered in regolith, like a layer of shredded books. And there's fragments of rock here and there. And, you know, from Apollo 15, which I'm showing here, they're at the edge of Hadley Rill, and the edges of the rill, they could just see little layers of bedrock, but they couldn't get there. So it's always been a thing that we're trying to do is get to bedrock on the moon, get through all this fragmented layer so that you can see what's beneath. And we're really close in several instances. This is the Apollo 15 example from Hadley Rill. You could see bedrock across the way, but you couldn't get there. And then Lunicod was probably the worst. They passed by something that looked like it was bedrock, but what Lunicod was trying to do was it was trying to drive far. And so every day they wanted to drive a certain distance and beat their previous roving record. So one of my friends who was on the Lunicod science team, he was pleading with them, hey, let's stop. It looks like bedrock. And Lunicod means moonwalker. So they were saying, Sasha, this is called moonwalker. It's not called Luna stop. They didn't get us up. So how is this sort of hole made? Well, basically either at depth, you have some kind of void. It could be a lava tube, but it could be just a fissure. It could be a crack. It could be some kind of tectonic thing. And you just need a void at depth, and then you get a collapse down into the void. And this is important because, you know, when we talk about a lava tube, oftentimes we're talking about, people think of it as a skylight into the lava tube. But if you have a lava tube and a skylight, you're really only seeing one lava layer from one time period. If you have a collapse pit, you're actually seeing down many, many lava layers, everything that's happened since the original void was formed. And then you cut down through that and get a fresh look into all of those layers. So this is kind of how I view it. If you bring home regolith and moon rocks from the surface of the moon, you can figure out what the history says with the best laboratories, and you spend 50 years doing it. But if you have a chance of actually just going down through that regolith layer and reading the history as it was written in the layers as they were laid down, it's much easier. So what is the story of the moon? Of course, I was talking about there's the first crust that forms at the very beginning. After accretion kind of dies down, the moon has a magma ocean. It forms its very first primary crust. Then on the moon, it started forming a secondary crust out of basalt, and it stopped. This is the only place in the solar system that we know about. Mercury is a possible other example, where you have both of those crusts preserved at the same time. So you can see not only what came through the crust from the interior and figure out what the interior of the moon is made out of, but also what it had to come through in order to get to the surface. In the case of Mars, it's almost entirely a secondary crust. The whole surface of Mars is covered in basalts. It's been totally resurfaced. We don't see a lot of evidence of its primary crust. And then on the Earth, of course, you get recycling of the crust over and over and over again, and you make these continental masses. And so these are examples of different kinds of crusts. So on the moon, you have the magma ocean forming, and then you have this unusual, it's kind of like the only place where you can go and look at what are the early stages of differentiation of a planet. What you had was plagioclase minerals, which are really low density, floating to the top, and olivine and pyroxene minerals sinking to the bottom. They're very iron and magnesium rich. And then you build up these kind of layers over time. And then once you do that, every time you melt and have a volcanism event, you sample some part of that stratigraphy down into the crust and mantle, and you bring it to the surface. So we can figure out the plagioclase crust, how that was formed in early differentiation, and then we get a little like aliquots of things that come from the deep down, so that we can figure out what the rest of the moon is made of and how homogeneous it is. And then there's the way that these planets lose heat, which is the Earth is kind of unusual. It has plate tectonics. It loses a lot of heat through the plate tectonic mechanism. But the other planets in the solar system have what we call stagnant lids, or like a single plate planet. So you don't have a lot of plate tectonics. You don't have a place like a mid-ocean ridge for all the heat to come to the surface. So you kind of build up heat for long periods of time. And this can lead to catastrophic events. Huge flood basalt eruptions, catastrophic overturns. In the case of Venus, we know that about 500 million years ago, there was an eruption of lavas that pretty much covered the entire surface of Venus with new lava. And so the Earth luckily doesn't have that. It occasionally has big flood basalt eruptions, but nowhere near the scale of the other planets. So studying a one plate planet like the moon tells us a lot more about the other planets, which have a similar ways of losing heat than the Earth does, really. The other reason that volcanism is quite interesting, and we like to study it across the solar system, is it is a way to create a habitable world. We just like we have primary, secondary, and tertiary crusts, we have primary atmospheres that are just the atmospheres left over from accretion, secondary atmospheres, which is a volcanism created atmosphere, and then on the Earth we have a tertiary atmosphere that's formed by all of the inputs of life. So volcanism is like an atmosphere factory. Your atmosphere is constantly being stripped away by the solar wind, other things happening to it. It's being sucked down into minerals. If it doesn't get replenished on some rate by volcanoes, then your atmosphere is eventually going to die out. So without a steady volcanic flux over long periods of time, it's hard for life to develop. But on the other hand, a steady volcanic flux is great. Pulsed volcanic fluxes can be really bad, and they can destroy everything. So here's an example of all of these bars here are giant volcanic eruptions, and then all of these gray things here are showing a percent of genera going extinct. So these mass extinctions, and many of them are correlated with big volcanic eruptions. And the biggest one was the Siberian Traps eruption. This was 250 million years ago at the end of the Permian era, during which perhaps 96% of all species in the ocean went extinct. And here's the T-Rex, no, it goes extinct. So I often like to say, I mean, if you can imagine just that part of Siberia erupting and causing most of life to go extinct, if the entire planet, like we see on Venus, completely resurfaced 500 million years ago, it kind of doesn't matter what Venus was like before that. Venus could have been a nice place to live. But after that happening, it's no longer a nice place to live. So I like to say, if someone's on a street corner saying the world is going to end in fire and brimstone, you should know that it has already happened, and it will probably happen again, and happen on Venus. All of the sinners on Venus are gone. So just a matter of time. If you look across the planets, 40% of the planet Mars is covered in these sorts of flood basalts, 60% of planet Venus, and then the remainder is just plains volcanism and other kinds of volcanoes, and a little bit of like non-volcanic stuff. And then 7% of the Earth covered in flood basalts. This is mostly just because we're constantly recycling the Earth, so we don't see the ancient crust. 17% of the Moon is covered in flood basalts, 17% of Mercury as well. So on Mars, I was talking about the catastrophic effect that flood basalts can have on a planet. On Mars, we have actually a period of really nice history on Mars where there was lakes and rivers. And if you've been following at all the Perseverance rover that's roving around in Jezero crater, there's a delta in Jezero crater. They're trying to figure out how long was there water there, etc. But right at the end of that period, that's when about 30% of the planet was resurfaced by the Hesperian flood basalts. There's a huge amount of sulfur. We see sulfates everywhere. We see that no more valleys, no more rivers, no more lakes. And then from the rest of history onwards, there wasn't a lot going on Mars as far as the hydrological cycle. So there's this question of timing. If a volcanic event happens slowly and over a long period of time, it can be okay, or it can be good, actually, at replenishing the atmosphere. If it happens catastrophically over a narrow amount of time and releases a lot of bad gases into the atmosphere, then it can be bad and it can be a killer. And so we're always trying to figure out, in all of these different cases on Mars and Venus and on the moon, what was the flux of these lavas? Usually you can pin it down with crater counting to say, oh, this lava happened within this time span of a couple 100 million years, but we don't know if it happened, during 6 of those years, or it happened slowly over all million of those years. So here are the sorts of end members that we have. You have the sort of Hawaiian-like incremental volcanism, not too bad. You have the Columbia River basalts here, which is an example of flood volcanism. So the Columbia River basalts, they came out over a period of time, but actually the mass majority of them came out over, a period of a million to a couple million years, which is actually pretty fast. And then the most mysterious part is like a turbulent volcanism. As we look at some planets, we see these rivers carved of volcanism. They look like water rivers in a lot of cases. And so it leads people to think, we know that the rocks on these planets have really low viscosity. They probably erupted very fluidly. They could have even been turbulent. They could have even eroded things. So they have some examples of lava flows on the moon that are 400 kilometers long, and that they wonder, could these have taken place over a series of days to weeks, or did it happen over a series of months to years, tens of years, centuries? So there's some evidence that it could be this crazy last one. These really long deposits, if you look at how thick they are, they're 30 to 50 meters thick, some of these lava flows. They form these vast plains, kind of featureless plains. And then there's these cases on Venus where it actually looks like a river. It sometimes looks like it's eroded down into things. And here's a sinuous rill on the moon. So if there is a planet that doesn't have plate tectonics, if you have a big plume coming up from the mantle and it can kind of push the plates apart and then come out, then that's a lot easier than trying to make your way through a thick and unyielding crust. So if you think about it, if the lava has a lot of time where it can't get through the crust and it just builds up and builds up and builds up pressure, it might not be that surprising that when they finally do come out, they come out fast and crazy. And the case on the moon is even stronger for that, because that crust I was telling you guys about, which is the low density crust, it is low density, so it's hard for these high density lavas to make their way through it. And it's also pretty cold and brittle. And so it's hard for them to bend the crust around themselves as they're trying to get to the top. So it's kind of likely that they built up a lot of pressure at the down, and then they made a crack through the crust. And then, the stuff that would come out would be really highly pressured. And the most interesting, there was a paper written a little bit ago by one of my friends in Deborah Needham, and that was the question of, if you did have these really high volcanic fluxes, could you actually have had an atmosphere around the moon that was just transient? Because if you calculate how much gas would have come out for some of those high fluxes of eruptions, you would create an atmosphere, and the atmosphere could stick around for maybe even 70 million years. And it wouldn't be a very thick atmosphere, but it could be, according to her calculations, as thick as the atmosphere around Mars is right now, which is pretty thick. So all of these questions of the flux of volcanic rocks, it greatly affects a lot of different things. Did the moon ever have an atmosphere? If you think about the same thing about Mercury, did it ever have an atmosphere? what was the atmospheric effect of those catastrophic resurfacing of Venus, and how short of a time did that happen over? What about the effect of those huge flood basalts on Mars? It touches many different fields across the terrestrial planets. And then the other really interesting thing about looking at a big stack of basalts inside a hole is that we very rarely get a clear picture of the petrology of where the rocks are coming from. If you look at a rock, you can see, oh, this rock has vesicles and it has crystals and crystals of certain mineral phases. And then you can calculate based on its composition where you think it comes from in the crust. But if you see it in context and you say, oh, this is how thick it was, this is how long this lava flow took to cool, it accumulated crystals at the bottom, it's family members with all these other lava flows around it, you can learn a lot more about precisely where in the crust it came from. And if you kind of add up all the lavas in different places, it's like a puzzle. You can rebuild what you think the interior of the moon looks like. So how would you actually do this in real life? What kind of instruments would you need? Well, I told you about this rover. It has this nice lazy Susan of instruments. You would need a camera that would look at the walls as you go down and measure how thick those lava flows are and kind of determine what their morphologies are. Like, are they normal Hawaiian lavas, or are they the kind of lavas that you find in the flood basalt regions? Then you need a microscope, and this particular microscope is really cool. It's called MMI. It not only looks at like microscopically what's going on with the vesicles and the minerals, but then it has it's like a spectrometer. It can look in many wavelengths and identify individual minerals, kind of like right there where you are. So you figure out what's the morphology, what's the mineralogy, and the alpha particle X-ray spectrometer measures elemental composition. So you get the elements too. And that's what you need to use to do the petrology, to calculate back where it comes from in the moon's interior. And the moon is a great place to do this compared to other places like Venus and Mars. The nice thing about it, no plate tectonics like the Earth, so you can compare it to all the other one plate planets. Unlike Mars, it doesn't have any weathering by wind or water. It's easy to get to, it's close by. It's not like Venus where you have to go basically to the bottom of the sea and it's like hot enough to melt lead and there's sulfuric acid clouds and everything. Venus is a tough place. It's really easy to talk to the moon. You can almost joystick a rover on the moon because it's so close. So I was talking mostly about this one pit, Tranquillitatis, but there's actually quite a lot. And as a cave enthusiast, you'd be glad to know that there are probably about 20 lava-related caves on the moon, and then actually hundreds of other caves, usually an impact melt caves. So when a crater gets formed, it flash melts everything inside the crater, and then it makes these crazy voids. They probably don't go back very far, but they're all over the place. And so people who talk about, astronauts going on long journeys across the moon, these caves could be like little refugia that they would go to hide from radiation if they needed to. Some of the caves are really big. This Lacus Mortis is one that's kind of in the northern latitudes of the moon. And later this year, Astrobotic is the first company that's going to attempt a landing on the moon, and they're going to go to Lacus Mortis. They originally were going to go to this pit, but I think the engineers kind of said, why don't we land someplace flat first, and then later we'll try and go to this pit. So they'll probably go near, but not quite at this pit. And then there's a bunch of other interesting pits. Actually, the first one that was ever found was this one in the Marius Hills. And the Marius Hills was a place that Apollo 18 was going to go. But if you're keeping track, there never was an Apollo 18. So this was a high priority target even before they knew that it had a pit crater in it. And then this is one of my favorite ones. It's in Mare Engini, which is on the far side of the moon. And it's got a huge magnetic anomaly around it too. So it's very bizarre. But the Tranquillitatis is the biggest one. It exposes the most layers. We have the most information about it. It's almost 100 meters across and about 125 meters deep, which is about 410 feet. So here's the location of this pit on the surface. Mare Tranquillitatis might sound familiar to you because Apollo 11 landed in the Sea of Tranquility, same thing. Apollo 11 landed right down here. And actually a previous robotic lander, Surveyor, landed right about there even before Apollo. And so it's not that far away. Actually, Apollo 17 landed up here. So it's kind of between these two Apollos, way out in the middle of the plains. So here's the map showing the Tranquillitatis pit in Apollo 11. So what are the challenges that we would face? You know, a lot of you are cavers. There's like a lot of logistics that go into this sort of thing. In our case, we're pretty close to the lunar equator, so it actually gets very hot during the day, up to 120 degrees C. And then we don't even imagine staying there at night because it's so cold, minus 130 degrees C. In the cave itself, it's always about 15 degrees C, which is actually a lovely temperature. But if you leave anything out on the surface, then it's subject to these crazy temperature swings. We actually discovered as we were doing this that not only is the place on the surface that we wanted to go pretty hot, but the cave itself is like a little hot box, and it just reflects light around inside of it, to the point that we think we've discovered the absolute hottest place on the moon. So as the sun sort of sweeps overhead, first it illuminates one wall, then it sweeps to the other wall. We want to stay out of the time of day when it's the sun is pounding down on our side of the wall, and kind of the shadows are actually much better and for us thermally. The other problem is, okay, the night is so cold, we probably won't survive the night. So the lunar day is only 14 Earth days long. So that's how long our mission would be. We have to land, we have to get in that cave, we have to explore everything we can in 14 Earth days. Then there's the dust problem. There's sharp, powdery dust, gets into everything. If you have spinning contraptions or telescoping contraptions, it can be a real issue. And, you know, cameras, they can get dust on their lens. And then, of course, the big issue, which is the danger of just rappelling down into a giant moon cave, into a mysterious cavern we know nothing about. It's actually a big funnel around the cave, and probably quite unstable. So regolith, you slide down. This rover is built to be very robust. It can operate when it's inverted. It can kind of flip itself over. It's a very capable rover, and it protects all of the instruments inside of its bays. So here's some of the stuff that we've been doing to prepare for this adventure. Here's my friend Mike. He's the main rover driver. He's driving Axel out in the, we call it the mini Mars yard, in front of our robotics laboratory. And then we built this wall with actual basalts from the Mojave Desert, and so that the rover could hang on it and then try and actually deploy its instruments properly. And then we went out to Arizona, kind of close to the Dante's Descent, which is a really, really cool pit crater in Arizona. But there was a pit crater on private land nearby that we got permission to go into. And then here's our rover going into, this is a place in Fossil Falls in California, if you've ever had a chance to go there. It's cut down, an ancient river cut down through a big basalt layer. We got to go there. This is our team, our Tether team. This is Patrick McGarry, who's the Tether guy. Our Tether is very small. It's like 5 millimeters or something across. And it has to provide us with power, it has to provide us communication, and it has to provide the strength so that we can hang on it. So it has this extremely strong strength member, very high technology that the whole rover hangs on as it goes down. And the tether has to be that small just so that we can wind all of the tether around our central axle so that we have enough length of the tether to get all the way to the bottom of the pit. Here's an example of one of our instruments. It prepares the lunar surface to be looked at by our other instruments by kind of grinding the surface and then brushing it off. And so we were demonstrating it here in a vacuum. And here's one of the pictures taken by our microscope of an actual, I think that was an actual lunar rock. So here we have our rover hanging from its apparatus as we test how strong our tether is. And then here we are in the field again, testing it, the tether. Of course, we have to run the tether a million times over really sharp rocks so we make sure that we don't actually break it. Here's me climbing around a lava tube, as I now do quite frequently. And then here's an example. We were rappelling this rover off of a lander that we'd built, thinking, oh, if the lander ends up, landing in a crater or on a hillside, we didn't want to build a ramp for it because we're like, oh, we have a rappelling rover. It can just rappel off the lander. So we are testing it here. And here's another picture of it in the Fossil Falls region of California. As I know that a lot of you guys are climbers or cavers, if you have any pictures of lava layers, I'm always looking for them. Any picture that just kind of dead on from straight across looks at any piece of a lava layer. We are trying to find as many of those as we can because our rover has to take pictures of lava layers and then we have to reconstruct what the lava layers look like from that. And it's actually kind of hard. You wish you could get further away from the wall to see a bigger picture. But if you can take many pictures and then stitch them together, it's actually, then we can figure out like how well can our rover do at discerning the morphology of the lavas going on here. And then there's a part of the mission that's kind of, I always like to put this in here because it's like a sales part where you not only have to have an idea and you have to figure out if it's going to work and you have to justify why you think you want to have it, but you have to kind of sell the idea to people, like how do people understand what it is that you're doing? So we often take the Axel rover and we drag it into like a conference so people can see how big it is. And then we have these little devices that we wear on our lapels. It's like comes out like one of those wallet retractable things. And then you can kind of, it's totally articulatable and you can see how the Axel rover actually works. And this was our team celebration cake. We had a lava tube in here, and then we had all of these layers of the marble cake that was exposed by our rover. And this is an example, sort of how would you actually do this mission? It's crazy, takes place over 14 days. 24/7 you would be running this rover. There is a time when people did this in the past, and that was the Lunokhod rover that was run by the Russians in the 1970s. So here's a bunch of Russians in the 1970s, the Lunokhod drivers, and they're just operating Lunokhod on the moon with a joystick, which I think is really cool. So this guy's just looking at a screen. He gets a picture every about 3 seconds. He's driving the rover as fast as he can. He has to sort of remember what rocks that he saw in the past so that he can go around them. It's like playing the video game with the absolute worst lag you can ever imagine. So here's my imagined moon diver control center. I keep telling JPL that this is what I want. Just under JPL, dig a giant cavern, put a control chair that's like a lawnmower chair, and then control Moondiver from there. This would be the Moondiver Ace. And so I always tell them this, and then they are never going to do it. So I would say, in conclusion, Moondiver. This is a mission that does not exist and may never exist. We proposed it in 2019. It got to the final 19 missions. Then they brought it down to the final 4. We weren't in the final 4. If you're paying attention to space news, they actually just chose the final missions from that round that started back in 2019. It's 2 Venus missions, an orbiter and a probe going into the Venus atmosphere. So that was actually really cool. One of them is, my friend is the PI of it, so I wasn't too sad. And so we will, next time it comes around is 2023, we'll submit this mission again. And then if there's any other chance to send it to the moon, as these like more frequent missions that I was telling you about are constantly going to the moon now, we'll try that way as well. So if we do get it submitted, it would be the first mission to venture below the surface of another world. It would be the first extreme terrain mission that we ever had. And it would be a great advanced scout for future human cave bases. And it would go where no robot has gone before. So with that, I will take your questions. Thank you.
If you have any questions, you can please type them in the chat and I will read them. Anyone have any questions? Just give people a moment. I do, while I'm thinking of it, it's like on a slide you had something about creep something. I was trying to remember one of the layer slides.
Oh, creep?
Yeah.
Yeah, creep stands for, there's this kind of rock on the moon that's high in potassium, rare earth elements, and phosphorus. So that spells creep.
Oh, yeah, okay, potassium.
Right, exactly. So they call it creepy lavas. And we've only sampled a couple of those, but we can see from orbit where they are located. And so but it was only until after Apollo that we had the data to show that kind of stuff. And so we're hoping with the return to the moon, we can return to a lot of these places that we had like little fragments of these things in the Apollo rocks that were thrown from great distances. But now with our great remote sensing data, we can tell kind of exactly where we want to go next. And so checking out those creepy basalts is certainly something we'll check into.
All right, John Dunham asked, how do you keep the regolith from going back in with the cable when it winds up?
So our mission is almost entirely a one-way mission. We are going to rappel down into that cave and never come out. So we do have the capability of running the winch in reverse. So say we get into a sticky situation, we want to come up by like a meter or so, we can do that. And there's like a cone at the top of the boom that keeps most of the regolith out. But even just rewinding it in a really nice pattern so that it doesn't get tangled is actually a quite difficult job. So what we decided is, okay, we can rewind it maybe a wind and a half or 2 winds, but we're not going to try and go up like tens of meters. We're going to go down into the pit and then we will die there.
So you said that you went to Arizona and Fossil Falls. Is there any other caves that the robot has gone to yet?
Originally, the robot went to a bunch of quarries. It's built not just for cave exploration, but also for just extreme terrain and like steep slopes. So we took it to a gold mine out in the Mojave where it was kind of a Martian-like terrain, and it went down these super steep like scree slopes and stuff. But those are the only caves it's went to. I personally built a version of Axle rover that I call Crap Axle. That's I made out of a wheelbarrow, and it just has a wheelbarrow and an axle, and then I put GoPros on it, and then I lower it over the it's just like it fits in a suitcase and it's really easy to carry around. So that one has gone to Utah and the Tabernacle Hill. There's a bunch of lava tubes out there, and then there's I just got back from Iceland and I took it to Iceland and I rappelled it down some cool lava exposures in Iceland as well.
So I'm guessing it's handling the sharp basalt pretty well, because that basalt and rope do not mix very well.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where you do it a couple times and then you're like, all right, I have to replace my rope. Because in that case, my Crap Axle does not feed out its line from the spool. I'm dragging it over a sharp basalt. So we do have like a length of hose that we use at the top, so that like at that critical juncture where the it goes over the edge, it's kind of like sheltered from being abraded directly against the basalt.
Does anyone else have any more questions? What is the size mass of the rover, and would it need a dedicated lander, or could it land with, or could it land with other payloads like CLPS-1 is planned to?
Yeah, so it depends on the actual capacity of the lander. I think it's about 100 kilos, so it's way too large for the current generation of CLPS landers. Usually they have an allocated payload, at least for our use, about 50 kilos. And so, but almost all the CLPS providers have like the first generation of landers, and then they have a second generation of landers that they're planning with a larger payload capacity. And those are the sort of mid-range landers, are ones we could fit on. The InSight lander, which landed on Mars and took the InSight mission, and also it's the same lander as Phoenix, built by Lockheed Martin. That one actually has a big landing capacity, and that's the one that we manifested ourselves on for when we made our mission proposal. So in that case, we were actually too small for that rover. You could send other payloads along with us in that particular case.
All right. I actually really like this question because I was thinking this one too. So would you send a LiDAR unit down with the rover to get a sense of the cavern size or any other information?
Yeah, so we had to like walk a line on this, because when you do a mission proposal, you have to say, this is what I'm going to accomplish 100% for sure. And so since the cave is a mysterious entity and we don't know how far back it goes, we don't know if it's really a lava tube, etc., it was hard. We couldn't base a lot of the mission on exploring the cave. It's like of course everyone wants to do it, but it has to be like an extra. And so what we decided to do, all of our instruments and our infrastructure was focused on the wall because you can see it. But then they allow you to co-manifest a tech demo if you want. That can cost up to $20 million. And so the first thing we wanted to put on the co-manifested tech demo would definitely be a LiDAR. And we have our microscope has lights on it. It has a bunch of LED lights that it uses to take the mineralogy. So it's like a tiny little flashlight, and it can also see in the dark. But just to know how big is this cavern, you know, would it be a good place to put a base? Does it go back super, super far? Or is it like a little small cavern that ends right after you can see it? That's really one of the top things we'd love to know. So what we're doing now is there's a couple different LiDARs around. Of course, LiDARs are going on this huge renaissance. Everyone's making LiDARs for, you know, self-driving cars and for terrestrial laser scanners and stuff. But very few of those LiDARs have then reached past that to be flight qualified. And so there was one LiDAR on OSIRIS-REx, but it's huge, you know? And so we're kind of looking for the best option. There's a couple people developing them, that a LiDAR that's kind of space qualified, radiation tolerant, and yet still small enough and cheap enough for us to carry along with us. We have, you know, I showed you those payload bays. Our instruments only take up one of those two payload bays. So you have a totally empty payload bay. We just ran out of money. So if you have money, you can put whatever you want in the remaining payload bay.
Yeah, some of the LiDARs are now backpack size. I know someone who was using it to literally run through a cave.
That's cool.
Like, so. Is there any, oh, sorry, there's another question. How close to the rock does the camera need to be to get the mineralogy?
So we actually put our camera, it goes a couple centimeters from the rock. And so what happens is we have the thing I was telling you about, which prepares the surface. It's like a little grinding wheel, and it grinds the surface pretty flat, and then it wipes off all the dust. And then we get a spot that's a couple centimeters by a couple centimeters, and we put the camera down almost right on there, because the camera has a shroud around it, blocks out any of the sort of ambient scattered light, and then it shines its LEDs on the surface and gets a beautiful picture of the mineralogy. You can take a picture from further away and it can still be in focus. You just won't, you know, if you shine lights on it, it's a decreasing, you know, signal to noise as you get more scattered light and more distance from the thing. So it's designed to work right up on there. And then the APXS, which is gets the elemental chemistry, that you bring that within about like 2 centimeters of the surface to get that sort of data.
All right, is there any other questions? All right, so on behalf of the National Speleological Society and the International Year of Caves and Karst, thank you for joining our presentation.